Hanukkah. Once again, we are celebrating the eighth-day festival of Hanukkah. While it is not part of the 7 Moedim, nor is it a holy convocation of Vayikra or Leviticus chapter 23, it is an occasion that is a constant reminder for us of what Yahweh is still doing for his people Israel, in spite of all the pressures of the nations of the world, pardon me, that they are trying to impose upon his chosen people. Yahweh is still with them. As we said in our Hanukkah greeting, which we sent out this week, we realize that once again we have been through 4 major events in history when the people of the nations have tried to destroy the people of Israel, both in Eretz-Yisra'el and also in the diaspora. Firstly, Haman tried to destroy our people. Antiochus tried to destroy the Torah. Hitler tried to destroy our race. And Hamas is still trying to destroy our soul. But on each occasion, when it appears that the nations have got the upper hand, Yahweh has always stepped in to support his people Israel. That is why we once again celebrate Hanukkah, because while it focuses on Antiochus Epiphanes and what he tried to do in 167 BCE, it was a turning point in the history of Israel. The all-out attack of Haman at Purim led the people to the point of rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem. Also, we're told in Daniel that it was after the onslaught against the Jews by the king of Persia that he actually gave permission for that temple to be rebuilt in Jerusalem. Once again, we see through the words of the book of Daniel that Yahweh, through the actions of Antiochus Epiphanes, turned Israel back to the words of Torah. In fact, their zeal for Torah later blinded their eyes to the reality that their long-awaited Mashiach was in their midst when Yeshua appeared on earth. They have suffered constantly since that time in the hands of the Hellenistic empires of the world for well over 2,300 years. That brings us to the readings of today. Starting in chapters 8, 10 and 11 of Daniel, we read how on 2 separate occasions Yahweh showed Daniel what would actually occur in centuries following his time. Daniel, in those chapters, was warned about the nations, what the nations would do in the coming time. In the first vision, in chapter 8, Daniel, during the reign of the last Babylonian king, just before Babylon was overthrown by the Medo-Persians, Daniel was taken in a vision by to the Persian capital of Shushan. And he saw the rise of the Medo-Persian Empire. But bear in mind, he was still under the authority of Babylon at that stage. Then in the midst of the vision, he also sees a male goat, which typifies Alexander the Great of Greece, which of course in turn finally conquered the Medo-Persians. But in the midst of that vision, there's a verbal exchange that takes place between the Holy One, who's not named, and Gabriel, the archangel, who was the one who explains all things in detail in Daniel's vision. Daniel records that conversation between the Holy One and Gabriel, where in verses 13 and 14 of chapter 8, it says, "How long will the events of this vision last? This vision concerning the regular offerings and the transgressions allows the sanctuary and the army to be trampled underfoot. The first said to me, 2,300 evenings and mornings, after which the sanctuary will be restored to its rightful state." The timing of 2,300 evenings and mornings appears to be far more global than that of what Daniel was actually seeing at the time in connection with the ram and the goat. However, the events are clearly related to those characters seen in the vision, but with a much greater significance. There is no way that that time period can be confined to the era of either of those two empires, the ram or the goat, because the conversation was on a celestial level and it was given during his vision. We must therefore look beyond the immediate events for a meaningful explanation. I believe what Daniel was being shown in that vision extended well beyond the era of the Medo-Persians and the Greeks. It was something that would impact upon Israel for many generations. So if we take a wider view of the wording that we see in Daniel, we're being shown how years ahead Yehuda was going to be dominated by a series of nations that had a totally different outlook on life from what Israel had been subjected to since they had become a nation. With the conquest by Alexander the Great of Greece, Yehuda was being impacted by the Western Empire, with whom Israel up to that point had never had any political or religious engagement at any stage in their history. After sojourning out of Egypt and having lived in Eretz-Yisra'el and then through the Babylonian exile, and following their return under the vassalship of Medo-Persia, Israel always dealt with their Semitic neighbours to the east. However, the coming of Alexander the Great, they were actually exposed for the first time to the Japhetic influence from the west. It was just the first time in history that the east had truly met the west. The impact that encounter had on the people of Israel was profound. The lifestyle of the Greeks was so vastly different that the leaders of Yehuda became enamored with the Western culture the Greeks offered. They had been introduced for the first time to Hellenism. Hence began the 2,300 years of submission to the Hellenistic ways of the West, beginning with the conquest of Alexander the Great in 333 BCE. If we count forward 2,300 years, we come to 1967 CE. So what changed in 1967? During the Six-Day War, the Temple Mount was returned to the control of Yehuda. As Yeshua, when speaking about the future of the temple, in Luke chapter 21 verse 24, he said, "Some will fall by the edge of the sword, and others will be carried into the countries of the Goyim," that is the Gentiles, "and Jerusalem will be trampled down by the Goyim until the age of the Goyim has run its course." But for some unexplained reason, Moshe Dayan, Minister of Defense, handed back the Temple Mount to the Jordanian authorities. Hence there has been a continuous conflict between the Arabs and the State of Israel from that time forward. Looking back with hindsight from our 21st century position, we can see through the scriptural narrative a repeat pattern of conflict and deliverance. As we said in our Hanukkah greeting, there have been at least 4 occasions when evil has tried to bring about an end to God's sovereign plan. Starting with the Babylonian exile, we see through the words of the prophets and Daniel, we see that Yehuda had to return to Eretz-Yisra'el so that Yeshua could be born as prophesied through the tribe of Yehuda. Haman, of course, tried to destroy the people of Israel and consequently prevent the building of the second temple. In time, of course, Antiochus Epiphanes, and through him the influence of Hellenism, nearly destroyed Yehuda and their reliance on Torah. So strong was the effect of Hanukkah and the attack that when Israel finally were confronted by Yeshua, who came in the flesh, they rejected him as not being the promised Mashiach, because they had become so devoutly involved with Torah because of the experience over the desecration of the temple, they failed to recognize that he was a fulfillment of that Torah. Then moving on, 40 years later, was the destruction of the Second Temple, and it brought about 1900 years of subjection to life in the Hellenistic world. But the modern State of Israel was born so that Yeshua can again return to the Temple Mount, as was also prophesied. But before Yahweh enabled the State of Israel to be formed, Hitler, again as the agent of the adversary, endeavored to destroy Israel as a whole race, for Yeshua could not return to Eretz-Yisra'el if his people had been destroyed. Finally, having been established in the land of Israel, it is now ready for the return of Yeshua. But once again, the forces of evil, along with the nations of the world, are trying to prevent the second coming of Yeshua. It's only a matter of a short time until the adversary will finally be chained and imprisoned for 1,000 years, while Yeshua reigns as king and priest over Israel and also restores the rest of mankind. So these are the reasons why we celebrate Hanukkah each year, as it is a constant reminder that it is part of God's sovereign plan that Yeshua is going to rule and reign. So as we also read this morning in the book of Maccabees, Yahweh, God, has always rescued his people from attacks by the adversary. Therefore, in these dark days of Israel, we need to stand firmly alongside them against the ones that are standing against Israel and against the people he has called, and acknowledge and trust that Yahweh will once again deliver his people from the clutches of the adversary, and soon will bring about the rule of Yeshua over 1,000 years.